project management. I'm glad you're here and hoping the feeling is mutual, or at least mostly mutual. This month's episode is a review of the groundbreaking book Drive by Daniel Pink. Now, this book deals with how to drive, or better put, motivate yourself, your coworkers, and your subordinates into doing excellent work. If you're a boss or a project manager, this book is a must read. I'd call this book Daniel Pink's finest work to date and the benchmark book on motivation. Finally, remember to stay tuned to the end of this episode for my pithy summary and your corresponding PMI code. Instead of jumping right to the solution, author Dan Pink dedicates the first third of Drive to the many outdated motivation techniques such as the carrot and the stick or the pink slip, no pun intended. So let's start there. One of the classic motivation techniques is to offer either cash bonuses or punishments if certain goals are achieved or not achieved. Dan Pink does admit that sometimes cash bonuses can be a temporary motivator, but they're definitely not a long term solution, as he provides piles of evidence why cash bonuses and frequent raises usually don't work. At best, they provide a very short term boost. And as for the stick or punishment, need I say anything? I think we all intrinsically know that threatening employees for any misstep is a recipe for disaster. So, how should we think about employee compensation? We should think of worker pay as researcher Fred Herzog states it. Worker compensation is a basic hygiene factor. Once the pay is fair, it should be a non issue. And as we'll see shortly, the AMP acronym is far better motivator than the carrot or stick and the many derivations of this technique. Autonomy. So, what does Daniel Pink think about worker autonomy? Well, it's paramount. Letting your team have as much autonomy as possible is critical. If you want to boil it down to a science, it comes down to an ancient engineering principle. The more constraints you place on a system, the less optimal your solution will be. Your team is a series of racehorses, and perhaps your top task is to feed them and get them on the track. Let them do their thing and run free on the track. Now, onto some real world examples from Dan Pink. Atlassian is a software company that pioneered the 1 day exploration day per week. If you had 1 day per week where you could explore virtually any idea, but you had to present your findings the next day, it led to some wild and often very financially lucrative business breakthroughs. Meanwhile, Google has a policy of up to 20% free time work, which has led to most of their breakthrough inventions, which includes Gmail, Google Translate, etc., etc. Now, early in my career, I worked for a company that did something similar to this. When they needed some totally new ideas, we'd go have lunch at a local brew pub. We'd often stay there well into the evening, literally brainstorming new products or concepts on the back of literal napkins. Some great ideas were generated from those sessions. Well, at least until the third pitcher of beer. Then things could go a little sideways. Number two, mastery. Mastery is the second key to motivation per Dan Pink. The core factor behind mastery is the Goldilocks principle. Just like porridge or oatmeal, if you're in North America, it needs to be the right temperature. Projects need to have the right skill level for your individual team members. As much as you can, don't give a project or a major task that is too easy. But on the flip side, don't give a major task that is too hard. Of course, the one exception I can think of this is if you assign a good mentor for a difficult task. Then a quote too difficult task can be a strength building task, which is super fantastic. It helps obviously both employee and the mentor. Now, what if a certain task is too easy? Well, that's why it's a good idea to have a diverse team that includes some new hires or even interns. They're often eager to complete any task. Meanwhile, what if a task is quite difficult? Well, one trick Dan Pink mentioned is to have a mastery mindset. In my words, find someone with a Winston Churchill attitude of never giving up. Another trick I've used is tag teaming a difficult task. I've found that two or three skilled engineers can solve many kinds of problems. Number three, purpose. Now, the third and final tip from Dan Pink is to remind your team of the big picture. Why are you doing this project? Now, perhaps you work for a charitable organization like a church, and the motivation factor is more obvious. Regardless, remind your team of the benefits of this particular project or even the overall mission of your organization. It sounds so basic and trivial, but it's so easy to get lost in the minutia while working on a long project. Now for some bonus content. A final great part of the book Drive are all the extras that Dan Pink puts at the end of the book. So here's a brief rundown of most of these. Number one, try to get a little better each day, and not at Instagram posts, but at leading meetings or employing a concept from this book. Number two, related to this, deliberate practice, which is a John Wooden concept, a very focused practice that can really lead to some tremendous growth over the years. Number three, take a sabbatical, and not just to escape your difficult coworkers, but to recharge and learn something new. And number four, finally, Dan Pink lists some books that are related to his masterpiece, Drive. And here's a list of a few of them: Why We Do What We Do by Edward Deci, A Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin, and The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge. Alrighty then, it's past my bedtime, so let's wrap up this little burrito. Here's our pithy little project management lesson or summary. Instead of focusing on what doesn't work, we'll keep the focus on the three motivation factors, which could be summed up by the acronym AMP. Number one, autonomy. As much as you can, let your team work the way they want to work, when they want to work, and how they want to work. Number three, mastery. Make sure your tasks are in the sweet spot, that Goldilocks or porridge zone. Not too hard, not too simple. And finally, number three, purpose. No matter how trivial the task is, it's always better to show your team why you're doing the task you're doing. Alrighty, folks, that's a wrap. And remember, today's episode counts towards 0.25 hours of power skills if you're looking to those continuing ed hours to maintain your PMP certification. Finally, thanks to all your listeners out there. We've had hundreds of downloads, and I've been just very encouraged by you.